trees don't have to be the difficult, time-consuming, laborious drawing subject that many people seem to find them to be. This is a real-time drawing that took 12.5 minutes to draw, demonstrating a way of drawing tree canopies, particularly trees in general. It all depends how we draw on how we think. Therefore, we need to learn to think, to observe, to process what we're looking at in a helpful way that makes it easy for us to then capture with lines on paper, marks on the paper, what we're seeing with our eyes and then how we're processing in our head. So let me explain now as I draw this canopy as a demonstration, how I'm thinking, what I'm looking for, the process of the progress of the drawing, all of which is really important for how I draw and how the canopy looks. This is an Australian eucalyptus tree in the Australian country city of Goulburn. Now, you'll notice I start with the canopy. I don't start with the trunk. I don't start with the branches. I start with the canopy and basically just get some sort of outline markings for the major parts of the canopy. And I'm particularly wanting to establish the proportions. Where's the top? Where's the center? Where's the left and right extremes? How far down does it come? And normally I'm also trying to get a sense of where the ground level is, not in this case because we actually don't see the trunk go into the ground. I do that and you'll notice that I'm not drawing a heavy outline around the canopy. So often when I look at drawings, that was clearly the first part of drawing the leaves that the person who did the drawing has done. A heavy outline does not capture the feel of a tree canopy. Firstly, because it's not a hard, solid, continuous surface. It's a whole bunch of leaves. And while we're not drawing the individual leaves, the effect of that is a very delicate, ruffled, even in a minute way, feel. And the silhouette line is not usually it's not the closest line to us. It's usually not by some distance the closest foliage. And so it's actually some distance away and curving away from us. And so we want a lighter feel to create the effect that we usually get in life, particularly from rounded spherical tree canopy tops. So I've just done a series of quick dotted lines and dashes and gaps, trying to keep it random, not trying to have a pattern that looks the same. But if I do a continuous line, it ends up looking very flat and cartoon-like. So I want to avoid that. We go to silhouettes. We see silhouettes very easily, and therefore our brain uses them to process information ahead of other things. So we therefore want all our silhouette edges to be as effective as we can. Now, I start with the canopy, as I said, and I really do dotted outlines, and then I start to create the feel of the three dimensions of the tree canopies. It's important not to see individual leaves. It's certainly important at this scale not to try and draw individual leaves. I'm drawing the overall effect of all of the leaves together. And the primary way we see the overall effect is actually through the shade and the shadows that are cast by the foliage forms. And so I'm now putting some hatching in to represent those shade and shadowed areas. And I'm trying to vary the direction so it makes some sense with the way the form kind of curves. So the other reason why I start top down with the foliage is because we don't start with the trunk or the branches. Really common problem with a lot of trees I see drawn is that the trunk is just too thick and the branches that go into the canopy are too thick to be able to, if you like, thin down enough to become twigs by the edge of the leaf line, by the canopy edge. And that creates a very artificial, childlike look, I think. Getting the proportions right and getting tree trunks and branches the right thickness so that they can dissipate as they divide and extend to the very edge of the canopy line is an important part of drawing a realistic looking tree. And it's easier to do if the canopy is already drawn, and then when we do start the branches and the tree trunks, we start from the top and work down as well. So our first branches can just be single lines or perhaps very close together lines, depending how close to the canopy edge they are. And then we can join them together, and as they come further down, we join them together further, and as we join larger branches together, we can start to create a trunk of the appropriate thickness. And so we end up with a trunk the right thickness for the canopy because we drew the canopy first, instead of drawing the trunk first and risking the very common dilemma of having a trunk that's just too wide. So that's what you're watching me do here, and that's why I'm doing it this way. Even if the trunk went into the ground and could be clearly seen, I would do it this way. So I'm working at creating the three-dimensional form from my hatching, and I'm not just using the hatching for shade and shadow, I'm also using it in this case for creating the effect of the colour, the local colour, the green of the leaves. Now, I don't always do that. It depends on the actual tree canopy. If this was basically a big solid mass of leaves, like a big old oak tree, I wouldn't probably do this. What I would do is I'd do some of the local colour with hatching, lighter of course than the hatching for the shaded and shadowed areas. But I would have some parts of the canopy with no hatching to indicate the parts that were most catching the sunlight. However, with a tree such as an Australian eucalypt, as this tree is, we usually have bunches of canopies and then parts where we see through the canopies blue sky through the other side. And if I was to leave parts of the canopy which were in full sunlight white paper, and then if I was to leave the blue sky white paper, it would be very hard to easily tell the difference between what's the sky and what's canopy that's in sunlight. And so to make it easier to read the whole thing, I'm using hatching over all of the green, but I am varying the amount of hatching for the green to indicate that some parts of the green that aren't in shade are still just slightly less lit and have a slightly darker feel. I do more of that at the very end when I make the final adjustments. Even though this is a quick drawing and it's only 12.5 minutes, we still need to spend that last bit of time where we get an overall look and we stop just going from one little part to another little part, and we pull the whole thing together so that the whole thing now works. Now, for me, an important consideration, particularly drawing trees, is the fact that I don't want all of the detail drawn to the same level. In life, when we look at something such as this tree, we end up focusing on a certain part of it, and we see that part in more detail, with more clarity, with harder edges, with darker values. And so I want a part of my tree to have, if you like, more visual intensity, more visual clarity, which means a little more care, hatching lines closer together, more carefully done, perhaps some canopy edging lines done with more intent. And that greater attention and darker values will attract the eye. So I want it, therefore, to be in a place where that works. I don't want it to be, say, at the very top periphery of the tree. I don't want my darkest values and my most heavy, obvious lines to be right up the top, because that doesn't work with how we'd look at this tree. In this case, I want them to be pretty much dead center, which is where the eye naturally falls, and then down to the lower left, because that's the more shaded part, and we tend to be drawn to the darker values. And this works well anyway, because these are going to be the more time-consuming parts to draw because there is more hatching. But also, as we draw down here, we'll create the effect that will draw the eye. And if we start with this area, it's also, I think, fairly common for most of us that the first part we draw takes us more time. We go slower because we're having to work out what we're doing and how we're doing it. Even if we kind of know in our head, we still actually have to decide for this particular subject on this particular scale, size drawing, pen we're using, exactly how those marks are going to work and look. And so we do go a little slower because we're drawing slower lines, more ink flows out, so they're a bit darker. We're a little more focused intently on the reference and trying to be more exact to create a good starting point that we can then move out from in a more gestural way. So everything's more intense and a little bit slower, and all this makes things darker, more detailed. So all of that works if it's the focal point. Now, once we've done that, we can start to move out to the peripheral areas, the other parts that we see, often just out of the sides of our eyes, so to speak, the edge of our vision. And so in those parts now, and they're going to be largely the parts that I'm yet to draw, we have a very light, much more gestural feel. The edge is, if you like, rougher. The hatching to represent the green is quicker, therefore lighter, and the lines are further apart because I am still wanting, even though I want these lines to convey this is leaf, I want the feel to be brighter because these are in the sunlight. And so that's what I'm doing at the moment. I'm finishing off, if you like, the canopy, and we're getting close to the part now where I rework over the whole canopy and just add some hatching. Sometimes I just add it to the same direction that I've done already. Sometimes I'll deliberately change the angle slightly and cross the lines with a second hatch over the top to create a darker value more quickly. So here I am just working out where have I missed bits. This is where it is good to have a quick run round visually over the whole tree because it's easy to have found one or two parts where you meant to come back to do something but got distracted and haven't. And that was certainly the case with this. So you'll notice that with the branches, I've drawn the branches in effect by drawing the darkness behind them in several places. This is a really, really visually interesting technique. Draw some branches through positive space, we actually draw the branches, and draw some branches through negative space by drawing the shadows behind them, not drawing the shadows. And the gap we leave between two sides of the shadow create the branch in effect. It creates a very interesting and very realistic effect. Now you'll find this reference photo on my channel community page, so you can have a go drawing this yourself if you want. And if you're new to my channel, I do have a playlist on trees and all things foliage. So there's a lot of information there, whether we do trees quickly or in great detail over longer periods and for all sorts of trees. If trees are a problem, why not have a look at that? G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. I hope you found this interesting. I love drawing trees. I love trees. It makes it a labour of love. But I think they're a really interesting subject to apply technique to. So why not give it a go? But look, whatever you draw, however you draw it, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.